Everyone, welcome to our channel, Rebecca, Stu and the Crew. I'm Rebecca and I'm so happy to have you here today to do some Dollar Tree crafts with me. So let's go over our supplies for our first project today. We'll need some rubber gloves to protect our hands and some of these DIY wood lanterns. We're going to need some dowel rods and some flowers or leaves of your choice. We'll be using some paint and some paint brushes. We'll need some raffia. And then we're also going to use some scissors and hot glue. So let's get crafty. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to paint our lantern. Now I chose to use a dark pumpkin orange and it is a chalk paint, so I only need to paint the lantern with one coat of paint since it's a little bit thicker of a paint. If you're using acrylic paint, you might want to go over it twice. It's really up to you and what paint you're using. Then we remove the hanger off of the top because these are going to sit on a table, not be hung. We're going to paint both of our lanterns the same color and then we'll let them dry. Once they're dry, we're going to go in with a dry brush and either some antiquing wax or some really dark brown paint. And we're going to add some aging to our lanterns. And we're just barely adding brown paint to the paintbrush and then going over the lantern several times to let the wood grain pick up a little bit of that brown paint, which is really fun because it helps show a little bit of the variation in the wood. You pick up that wood grain and it just really helps that wood to kind of pop from the background. I just love the way it looks when you add a little bit of antiquing to the wood projects from Dollar Tree, but that's really just personal preference. If you don't like the aged look, then just go ahead and skip over this part. And then we'll set these aside to dry and take your dowel rod. I picked these up in the nautical aisle. It was kind of like a driftwood style craft supply over the summer. We're just going to take some dog nail clippers, which are amazing for cutting dowel rods and the metal stems that are on the flowers. We're just going to create a groove right through the center and then pop the dowel in half. Really easy. You don't have to cut all the way through, because you kind of want that rough edge at the top, and you'll see why in just a second. I didn't clean the brush. I'm using the same brush with the brown paint and orange that's in that cup, and we're just going to paint the dowel rods. And now we'll take some raffia, cut that down to size. I'm using about, I had like 3 strands and I cut those in half a couple times. I end up with like 6 or 8 pieces all together. Then take some hot glue and you're going to glue one of those wood dowels to the top, leaving the rough edge on the top portion there, because these are going to be a stem. And it doesn't really matter if they're leaning or not perfectly straight. You kind of want them leaning a little bit because no stems grow completely straight. So these are obviously going to be like little light up pumpkins. And now that's all that's really left to do is decorate the top. So I'm taking that raffia that I cut and I am just tying this right around the stem. It's okay if they don't all get tied on. Sometimes it's hard to get all those loops through the center of the knot. I just tie that one on separately. Then they felt a little bit loose to me, so I ended up going ahead and tying them all a second time just to make sure they were nice and tight on the stem. And I didn't want to use like a bunch of hot glue underneath of it. Sometimes it shows, and I don't like when you can see a bunch of hot glue on a craft project. So really just a double knot and tying it kind of tight will work. Then go ahead and trim up that raffia to make it the length that you want it to be. Now we'll take some of those fall flowers from Dollar Tree. They come in really pretty colors this year. We've got the marigold yellow color. They've got a pumpkin orange. There's a burgundy and a plum purple and also a dark navy blue with a little bit of a gold accent, which I think is so pretty. The leaves that come on these stems come in a 3-piece stem style or leaf style. So we just cut those apart with the scissors and glue those on underneath the raffia. And you can just tuck that up under the raffia with a small dot of hot glue. And you can add as many or as little or none at all leaves. It's really up to you. Again, this is your project. This is just a suggestion. And the flowers, I chose to use 3 of them. I was going to use 4 initially, but I thought 3 was enough. I really wanted to see the stem. And I thought 4 flowers would be a little bit overbearing and hide it. So we just stuck with the 3. And that's what both of our little pumpkin lanterns look like. They'll make a really fun addition to our tablescape this year. Now we're going to do project number 2. There's a few new supplies we're going to use, as well as some of the supplies we use in our first project. We'll need some wet wipes. Those will help with smearing the paint. We're going to use the raffia again, but again, any color will do. It's up to you. We'll need a heating tool this time, or a hair dryer, which will work just fine. We'll need a DIY wood jack-o'-lantern from the Dollar Tree, and some school glue. As long as it's white glue, it will work, and some stain. We're also going to use some of these wooden beads from Dollar Tree. So let's get crafty with our second project here. Now, I'm going to kind of work in layers for the jack-o'-lantern's face. So it kind of won't make sense at first. You'll be like, why is she adding the different colors? But it will in the end. You'll see kind of what I'm going for here. So for the very bottom, I'm going to add this white. It is chalk paint. And I'm going to do his eyes, his nose, and his mouth with the white chalk paint. I'll let that completely dry before I move on to the next step with the facial features. But once the facial features are done with the white paint, while it's drying, I'm going to go ahead and paint the rest of the jack-o'-lantern. And I want him to look old and weathered, like he's been around for a while. So I am going to use the wood stain. So I'm just adding a little bit to a wet wipe and then smearing that into the wood grain around the mouth and stuff, and the eyes. If you want to get closer and try not to get it on where you just painted, then you could go ahead and add a little bit of stain onto a paintbrush and help you get closer to those facial features. And that way it's just a little bit easier and you don't make a huge mess like I did, which you'll see with the mouth here in a minute. I ended up having to go back over it with some white paint. But yeah, just work in small sections and keep using that wet wipe to smear the stain around. And it doesn't matter if it's completely even with the tone, because we're going to add some detail lines over top of the stain. So if it's a little darker in one spot than it is another, that's okay. Don't worry about it. So I got a little bit on the mouth here. I tried to wipe it off, but the paint was already dry, so I couldn't get the stain off. So I just went over it with the white paint for a second around there. Now taking that same brush, we're just going to add a small amount of white paint. We're basically dry brushing the lines of the jack-o'-lantern to help them look a little bit more 3D around the edges here. And then we'll take a clean wet wipe and we're going to smear out those edges, basically adding like a shadow style highlight around the edges. And then once I have that the way I like it, I'm just going to take a small amount of orange paint and go over the lines as well to help add just some layers of color. So we've got the brown, some dark orange, and a little bit of that white, and it really is going to kind of pull the whole thing together at the end here. This is helping to create those lines so that he doesn't look so flat. We want him to look a little bit more rounded and more like a real pumpkin. I just work in a little bit at a time. If I mess up, that's okay. I can just go right back over it with the colors that are underneath and hide my mistakes. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're new to crafting. It's not all that hard. And as you can see here, we're just blending out those lines with a wet wipe anyway. So if you get it on a little bit thick, you could probably fix it just by smoothing out the lines with that wet wipe. So now we're going to add this crackle technique by taking that school glue and we're going to go over the facial features. And we're going to add a generous amount of that school glue to the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And while it's still wet, we're going to add a different color paint on top. And by the end of the project, you'll see kind of what I'm going here. I really want him to have that older aged look. So I want to see like the light that used to be behind his eyes just a little bit, which is where the orange and the white are going to kind of play into it here. But before we do the darker color on top, we're going to go ahead with either a hair dryer on high or a heat tool, and you're just going to go over top of this until it dries. It'll dry pretty quickly, which helps it to create a kind of crackle technique. I did not realize my battery died while I was drying this, so you don't see me adding the second coat of paint and glue. But what we're going to do once this is dry and has crackled, we're going to put another layer of glue and then we put the black paint on top while it's still wet, and then go back in with the heat tool for a second time. So I know you don't see all of the parts there, but that's what I did. And as you can see, as this is drying, that white paint that's underneath, you can start to see it, and you'll see a little bit of the orange. So that old kind of light seems to be like dimming in his eyes, if that makes sense. So it's kind of the theme I was going for there. Now we're taking a piece of twine, or the original hanger it came with will work as well. And you're just going to string some of the wood beads onto the hanger, and then add a little bit of hot glue as you add those back into the holes that were already drilled into the pumpkin. And we're just tying this tight to the top, just to give the hanger a little bit more detail. And now we'll start adding some details to the top. I have some more of those flowers. I chose the orange ones this time. I made a raffia bow for the top. I did some leaves first, then the raffia bow. It's a little bit long, so I trim it. I add the orange flowers. And I thought it still looked a little bit empty, so I added a few more leaves to the top. And here is our jack-o'-lantern DIY project. I just love how this turned out. I love the crackle technique. It's a fun way to paint. So now for our third project, we're going to use this 3D pumpkin. We'll need some twine. We're also going to use ribbon this time to create a bow. And then we'll use the items we used in the last two projects also. We're going to remove this raffia bow and try to get as much glue off as you can. If you don't use a raffia bow again in your project, hold on to it, because you can always use it in a different craft project. Once we have most of the glue off, we're going to go ahead and start staining our jack-o'-lantern, or our pumpkin here. So this is those 3D pumpkins. They also have leaves and things like this at Dollar Tree that have those layered effects, which I always think are really pretty and fun to do craft projects with. I was really excited that they brought these pumpkins back this year. So as you can see, I'm just adding some gel stain and smoothing it out with the wet wipe. And we're going to do the whole entire pumpkin this darker brown color. I hadn't quite decided exactly what colors I was going to do here yet. So when I started to do the stain, I kind of just went for the whole thing. If you choose to do those raised portions of your pumpkin a different color, you could probably skip the stain on the center pieces, or the raised pieces. So I'll let that dry. Once it dries, I went in with some orange paint for the raised pieces. I ended up with a little bit too much paint there. I kind of just dumped some paint on there. It was a little bit too much. I overestimated. So what I did to clean up the paint was I just went with a wet wipe and smoothed out the paint and removed a lot of the excess. And you can clean up the edges also. And now we're going to take some of that school glue again. We're going to do that crackle technique. And we're going to do a nice thick coat of the glue on the whole entire thing. So we're going to make this whole pumpkin have that crackle paint technique. So you don't want to put it on real thick, but you can kind of see, you put it on thick enough that you can see the glue, if that makes sense. I'm hoping you guys are kind of getting the idea of how much glue to put on here. You don't want it to be drying in sections before you get done, so you definitely want to put it on thick enough that you can kind of do the whole thing in one swoop. So once I have the glue on, then I quickly go over the whole thing with a thin coat of white paint. At first I was just going to do these raised portions, and I decided to go ahead and just do the whole entire pumpkin. I was kind of just playing this by ear and making it up as I went along. So here's what it looks like. It's already starting to separate as the glue dries. You want it to dry a little bit faster, which is where that heat tool comes in, or a hair dryer. The faster it dries, it really helps to kind of grab the glue, and as it shrinks, it grabs the paint with it and helps to create that crackle technique. I just love this. It's just a really fast way to give a nice, fun, aged farmhouse look to your craft projects. Just work in sections. I kind of move from one section to the next to make sure that I'm getting as close to an even crackle as I can. You can see that orange and brown paint popping through, but it was still a little bit too much white paint for me. So we're going to fix it. We're going to take a wet wipe and we add just a small dab of antiquing wax, and we're going to just brush over where the brown was at. Very lightly. You don't want to rub too hard because you don't want to chip the paint off. But then again, you do want to add that little bit of color back in. So we're just lightly going over it. And all of the glue and the paint underneath is completely dry before I do this part. We've got that all worked out, and then we'll do the same thing with some orange paint. I'm using the exact same white, so it still has a little bit of brown. And we're just kind of going around the edges to add some detail and to really help those orange pieces kind of pop up off the background. And then I went back over this with the heat tool to dry it quickly, and it kind of helped crack a little bit of the edges there that had just a tiny bit of wet glue still there. Here's what it looks like so far, and then we're going to decorate the pumpkin. So I'm going to take some ribbon, and I'm basically creating an X pattern repeatedly, and I just kind of stagger them. At first I was going to do like all the plaid, then the leaves, and then the green, but instead I decided to kind of go a little bit different. It was a little bit too much plaid altogether, so I just started to alternate the colors. And then we'll take some twine. We'll wrap that right around the center of the ribbon, and we'll pull it tight, make a nice bow. Kind of adjust your strands, and make sure you make your twine long enough that you can create this beaded tassel at the bottom. So we'll take 3 of the beads, put that on one end, and then tie a knot at the bottom. You can add a little dot of hot glue too if you like, and just create these cute little tassels at the bottom of your bow. Again, you're just tying a knot at the bottom, and you can add a small dot of hot glue to make sure it doesn't come apart. So here's what our bow looks like, and we'll add that right to the top. And then some more Dollar Tree flowers. We'll add one to the center. And then we have some of the leaves. We'll tuck those underneath of the bow. And that is what our last project looks like. And I didn't put a hanger on this, so I'm just going to lean it on a shelf. I love this one so much. I think it's my favorite. Though I do love this jack-o'-lantern and its aged look. And then again, I love the lantern. So they're all a lot of fun to make. But I think that last pumpkin is definitely my favorite one. I love these so much. I hope you guys liked learning how to make these with me today. I love getting to share these projects with you guys and my joy for crafting. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And here are some other videos from our channel you might also enjoy. I do Dollar Tree shopping videos every Tuesday and Friday, and then the DIY crafting videos every Thursday. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.